Sometimes, the greatest love stories begin the moment someone chooses kindness over curiosity. The rain had been falling over Cedar Creek since dawn, soft enough to soothe the fields, yet steady enough to empty the narrow streets before noon. The little town rested quietly between rolling hills and rows of old maple trees, a place where everyone knew every mailbox, every front porch, and almost every story. It was the kind of place where strangers rarely appeared, and when they did, people noticed. Ethan Walker wiped a streak of grease from the back of his hand as he lowered the hood of an aging Ford pickup parked outside Walker Auto Repair. At 39, life had carved faint lines around his eyes, but they hadn't stolen the calm kindness that seemed permanently settled there. Years of raising his daughter alone had taught him that peace wasn't something the world handed you. It was something you built, one ordinary day at a time. Inside the small garage, the familiar scent of engine oil mixed with fresh coffee drifting from a worn machine in the corner. Country music hummed softly through an old radio, while rain tapped gently against the tin roof like patient fingertips. His phone buzzed. "Dad, don't forget tonight is movie night," his 11-year-old daughter Lily reminded him through a cheerful voice message. Ethan smiled without realizing it. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." He slipped the phone back into his pocket just as the distant growl of an engine echoed through the rain. A sleek, dark blue luxury sedan rolled slowly onto Main Street before coughing once. Then again. The engine died. The car coasted to a stop directly across from his garage. Ethan watched quietly. No irritation. No excitement. Just another driver needing help. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped into the rain. She couldn't have looked more out of place. Her cream-colored coat was elegant despite the weather, her posture graceful even as she glanced at the silent engine with restrained frustration. Damp strands of blonde hair escaped from behind one ear, framing a face that carried both confidence and unmistakable exhaustion. She looked around the nearly empty street before noticing the weathered wooden sign above Ethan's garage. Walker Auto Repair. Their eyes met only briefly. She offered an apologetic smile before walking toward him. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "Would you happen to know anyone who could take a quick look?" Ethan returned an easy smile. "I think I know a guy." For the first time that morning, she laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't practiced. It sounded like someone remembering how to breathe. Minutes later, Ethan was leaning beneath the raised hood while rain drummed softly against the metal. His movements were patient and precise, the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years listening to machines more carefully than people. The woman stood nearby holding an umbrella over both of them despite getting half-soaked herself. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said without looking up. "I know, but you stayed anyway." She looked toward the gray hills surrounding Cedar Creek. "It's peaceful here." It usually is. There was a long silence between them. Not an awkward silence. The kind shared by two people who had grown tired of pretending the world moved too fast. A loose electrical connector. Nothing more. Ethan secured it, checked the ignition once more, then nodded. "Try it now." The engine came alive instantly, smooth and quiet as though nothing had happened. Relief softened her expression. "I was expecting something much worse." Sometimes little things stop even the strongest engines. She stared at him for a moment longer than necessary. It felt as though he wasn't talking about the car anymore. She reached into an expensive leather handbag and removed several crisp $100 bills. "Please." He shook his head before she could finish. "It took 5 minutes. You still fixed it." "So next time," Ethan replied, closing the hood with a gentle pat. "Buy dinner for someone who needs it more than I do." She blinked. People usually recognized wealth. People usually expected something. This man had asked for nothing. Not even her name. She slowly lowered the money back into her purse. Then, "Thank you." Ethan simply nodded. "Drive safely." She climbed back into the sedan, paused with both hands resting on the steering wheel, then glanced once more through the rain-speckled windshield. The quiet mechanic had never asked who she was. And somehow, for the first time in years, Claire Kensington, the billionaire CEO whose name appeared on magazine covers across America, was profoundly grateful for that. The people who hide the biggest secrets are often the ones searching for the smallest moments of peace. 3 mornings later, Cedar Creek woke beneath a sky washed pale blue after days of gentle rain. Dew shimmered across the pastures, and the smell of fresh-cut hay drifted through the quiet streets as shopkeepers unlocked their doors one by one. The town moved at its usual unhurried rhythm, untouched by the restless pace of the outside world. Ethan Walker was already outside his garage, wiping down the windshield of an elderly customer's pickup before she arrived. He believed people deserved to receive their cars cleaner than when they left them. It wasn't good business. It was simply the right thing to do. Across the street, the familiar dark blue sedan rolled slowly into town. Ethan recognized it immediately. The woman stepped out wearing faded blue jeans, a cream sweater, and simple white sneakers. Gone was the polished elegance of the businesswoman he had met days earlier. Today she looked like someone trying very hard not to be noticed. She smiled as she approached. "I hope my car isn't broken again." Ethan chuckled. "I was beginning to think you drove around unplugging wires just to visit my garage." She laughed, a little louder this time. "I'll never confess." The easy exchange surprised them both. Some conversations demanded effort. Others seemed to have been waiting for years. "I actually came to thank you properly," she said. "You already did." "I don't think I did." He shrugged. "Then maybe you can tell me your name." She hesitated for only a heartbeat. "Claire." "Ethan." Their handshake felt strangely unnecessary now. The introductions had arrived after the trust. Instead of leaving, Claire wandered through Main Street. She stopped inside the old bookstore where the owner insisted she borrow a novel instead of buying one. She bought homemade pie from Mrs. Dalton's bakery. She spent nearly half an hour talking with an elderly veteran sitting alone on a wooden bench outside the post office. Nobody recognized her. Nobody stared. Nobody asked what she owned. They simply welcomed another visitor. By late afternoon, she found herself sitting beneath the giant oak tree overlooking Miller Lake, while Lily skipped stones across the water. "You're getting better," Claire called. "I've been practicing," Lily answered proudly before looking toward her father. "Dad says every stone deserves a second chance." Claire smiled. "Your dad sounds wise. He just says stuff like that." Ethan laughed softly. "I've been exposed." For a while the three of them watched the ripples disappear across the still water. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, and somewhere across the lake a church bell echoed through the valley. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment. Board meetings, private jets, financial reports, television interviews. For the first time in years, none of them existed. Only birdsong, only laughter, only silence that healed instead of suffocated. Hundreds of miles away, however, the silence was beginning to alarm people. Inside the glass headquarters of Kensington Holdings in Chicago, a conference room buzzed with anxious voices. "Still no contact?" "No, sir." Her phone, mostly turned off. "And security?" "They lost visual confirmation 2 days ago." Richard Hale, Claire's chief of staff, looked toward the enormous digital map glowing across the wall. "She never disappears without a reason." His assistant swallowed nervously. "We traced one credit card purchase." Richard turned sharply. "Where?" The answer appeared on the screen. "Cedar Creek. Population, 2,843. He frowned. What on earth could possibly be in a town that small? Back beside the quiet lake, Claire accepted a paper cup of coffee from Ethan. She looked at the fading sunset reflected on the water. "You have something special here," she whispered. Ethan watched the golden light settle across the hills. "No." He smiled gently. "We just remember to slow down long enough to notice it." Claire lowered her eyes. She wasn't simply falling in love with a small town. She was quietly falling in love with the man who had taught her that peace could never be bought, only lived. A child can recognize a safe heart long before two adults are willing to admit they are falling in love. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in warm sunshine, the kind that painted Cedar Creek in shades of gold and green. Church bells echoed across the valley as neighbors greeted one another by first name. Pickup trucks rolled slowly through Main Street, and the scent of smoked barbecue drifted from the community park where families gathered for the annual farmers market. Claire Kensington had intended to stay only one more day. That had become 4. Every morning she told herself she would leave after breakfast. Every evening she found another reason to stay. She wandered between handmade quilts, fresh peaches, jars of wildflower honey, and children laughing around a small wooden carousel that had been turning for nearly 50 years. Life here wasn't impressive. It was honest. Across the park, Ethan was helping volunteers repair a weathered gazebo before the evening concert. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and a light layer of sawdust covered his faded work shirt. He worked without giving instructions, quietly lifting the heavier beams before anyone else reached them. Claire noticed something. Whenever someone thanked him, he simply smiled and changed the subject. He seemed uncomfortable receiving praise. "Dad." Lily came running across the grass, nearly colliding with him. She wrapped both arms around his waist before noticing Claire standing nearby. Her bright blue eyes widened. "It's the car lady." Claire laughed. "I guess that's my official name." Lily grinned. "I'm Lily." "I know." The little girl tilted her head. "You do? Your dad talks about you." Ethan looked up in surprise. "I don't remember saying much." "You didn't have to," Claire answered softly. Parents always tell the truth with their eyes. For just a second, Ethan forgot what he had been about to say. Instead, he smiled. Lily reached into a paper bag and pulled out 2 oversized cinnamon cookies. "I bought one for Dad and one for you." Claire blinked. "For me? You looked lonely the other day." The words were innocent, completely without judgment. Claire accepted the cookie with both hands. "Thank you." Lily shrugged. "My teacher says cookies help sad people." Ethan laughed quietly. "I've been living with a tiny therapist." The 3 of them found an empty picnic table beneath a giant maple tree. Around them, children chased one another through the grass while an old bluegrass band tuned their instruments beneath the gazebo. The gentle sound of fiddles floated across the warm afternoon air. Claire watched Ethan listening to Lily describe her newest school project. He never interrupted. He never checked his phone. He never looked distracted. He listened as though every word mattered. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something long forgotten began to ache. Not painfully, hopefully. She tried to remember the last uninterrupted conversation she'd had that wasn't measured in quarterly earnings, shareholder expectations, or media interviews. She couldn't. "Dad says every person deserves someone's full attention," Lily said proudly. Claire looked at Ethan. "Is that another one of your sayings?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I probably talk too much." "No," Claire whispered. "I think most people don't say enough that matters." For a moment, none of them spoke. The breeze stirred the leaves overhead, scattering patches of sunlight across the table. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed so freely that half the park turned to smile. Claire found herself smiling too. Without effort, without pretending. Miles away in downtown Chicago, another smile disappeared. Richard Hale stepped out of a black SUV and stared at a surveillance photograph lying inside a confidential folder. The image had been taken from a traffic camera 3 days earlier. Claire's sedan. Location confirmed. Cedar Creek. He narrowed his eyes. "Book the helicopter." His assistant hesitated. "You think she's in danger?" Richard slowly closed the folder. "No." His expression grew more concerned. "I think she's beginning to find a life she may never want to leave." Back beneath the maple tree, Lily slipped her small hand into Claire's without thinking. Claire instinctively squeezed it. Neither of them realized Ethan had quietly witnessed the moment. He didn't see a billionaire holding his daughter's hand. He simply saw 2 lonely hearts discovering, in complete silence, that healing often begins long before anyone dares to call it love. The strongest people are not the ones who reveal everything. They are the ones carrying heavy truths while still choosing to smile. Monday morning settled gently over Cedar Creek. A thin layer of mist floated above Miller Lake as sunlight slowly spilled across the quiet streets. Pickup trucks rumbled toward nearby farms, the diner filled with its usual breakfast crowd, and the old clock above Town Hall struck 8, with its familiar echo. For everyone else, it was another ordinary day. For Claire Kensington, it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep living 2 completely different lives. She rented a small lakeside cabin at the edge of town, a place so simple it contained little more than a wooden porch, an old fireplace, and windows overlooking the water. Every evening, she brewed her own coffee, watched the sunset disappear behind the hills, and listened to crickets instead of conference calls. Then, precisely at 9 o'clock each night, another version of Claire quietly appeared. She opened a slim laptop. The peaceful cabin transformed into the temporary headquarters of a billion-dollar empire. "Good evening, everyone." Within seconds, faces from New York, London, Singapore, and Chicago filled her screen. Stock projections, acquisition reports, board approvals, legal updates. For 90 minutes, she spoke with calm authority, making decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars without raising her voice once. The executives saw the confident CEO they had always known. None of them noticed the old rocking chair behind her, or the handmade quilt folded across the couch, or the sound of frogs singing outside an open window. When the meeting finally ended, Claire closed the laptop and leaned back with a long breath. Silence returned. Real silence. Not the expensive silence of penthouses and private offices. The peaceful silence of a small town that expected nothing from her. The following afternoon, she stopped by Walker Auto Repair carrying 2 cups of coffee. I figured mechanics probably survive on caffeine, she teased. Ethan accepted one with an appreciative smile. You figured correctly. She looked around the modest garage. Every tool had its place. Every shelf was carefully organized. Even the worn concrete floor had been swept clean. You treat this place like it's home. It is. You never wanted a bigger shop? Ethan thought for a moment before answering. I wanted a bigger life. She looked confused. He nodded toward a framed photograph sitting on his workbench. It showed him holding a much younger Lily beside the lake. I got that. Claire followed his gaze. She couldn't remember the last time someone measured success without mentioning money. Just then, a black SUV rolled slowly past the garage. Its tinted windows reflected the afternoon sun. Neither Ethan nor Claire paid much attention. Half a block away, however, the SUV quietly stopped. 2 men remained inside. Positive identification? Yes. She's here again. One of them lowered a camera after taking several photographs through the windshield. We should notify Mr. Hale. Not yet. Why? The older man continued, watching Claire laugh at something Ethan had just said. Because I've worked security for her for 11 years. He paused. I've never seen her laugh like that. Back inside the garage, Ethan reached beneath the counter and handed Claire a small paper bag. What's this? Mrs. Dalton dropped off fresh blueberry muffins this morning. She smiled. You saved one for me. I had a feeling you'd come back. Claire looked at him for several quiet seconds. You seem very certain about people. Not people. He shook his head gently. Good hearts. His answer lingered between them. Outside, the 2 security agents exchanged uneasy glances. One reached for his phone. It's time to report in. Within minutes, Richard Hale received the photographs in Chicago. Claire, standing inside a small-town garage, smiling at a mechanic, holding a paper bag of homemade muffins as though it were the most valuable gift she had ever received. Richard stared at the images in complete disbelief. He wasn't worried that Cedar Creek would change Claire. He was beginning to fear that Cedar Creek already had. And for the first time since arriving in town, the peaceful little world Claire had carefully built was no longer protected by anonymity. Someone from her other life was finally coming to find her. Love rarely arrives with grand speeches. More often, it reveals itself in the quiet moments when 2 people begin carrying each other's burdens without ever being asked. The first leaves of early autumn drifted onto the sidewalks of Cedar Creek, covering Main Street in shades of amber and gold. The morning air carried a crisp chill, and the smell of fresh cinnamon floated from Mrs. Dalton's bakery long before sunrise. It was the week of the town's Harvest Festival, the biggest celebration of the year, and everyone had found a way to contribute. Everyone except Claire. At least, that was what she believed. She stood outside the community hall watching volunteers unload wooden tables from aging pickup trucks. Children hurried past carrying pumpkins almost too large for their arms, while elderly neighbors decorated windows with handmade wreaths. I feel guilty just standing here, Claire admitted. Ethan handed her a pair of work gloves. Problem solved. She raised an eyebrow. You're putting the billionaire, she caught herself. The tourist to work? He smiled. In Cedar Creek, everyone works. Within minutes, Claire was helping paint old wooden signs, arranging flower baskets, and tying ribbons around market stalls. Her expensive manicure disappeared beneath specks of white paint, and a strand of blonde hair escaped from beneath the borrowed baseball cap Lily had insisted she wear. You missed a spot, Lily giggled. Claire looked down at a streak of paint across her cheek. Oh no. Instead of answering, Ethan reached into his pocket, unfolded a clean handkerchief, and gently wiped away the paint. Neither of them spoke. The movement lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow the world around them seemed to pause. Children continued laughing. Hammers kept striking nails. Someone tested microphones near the stage. But for Claire, every sound faded behind the simple kindness in Ethan's eyes. He stepped back almost immediately. There. She smiled softly. Thank you. Their conversation never became romantic. It didn't have to. Some feelings were too honest to hide behind clever words. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly over the valley. By the time the festival opened, rain began pouring across the town square. People rushed to protect decorations. Vendors struggled to cover their booths. A sudden gust of wind snapped one of the support ropes holding the main stage canopy. Look out! The heavy canvas collapsed toward a group of children. Without hesitation, Ethan sprinted forward. He caught one side of the falling frame, while another volunteer grabbed the opposite end. The metal beam stopped only inches above the frightened children. Everybody back, Ethan called. Claire was already kneeling beside a little boy who had stumbled in the confusion. Are you hurt? The child shook his head, trembling. Claire wrapped her coat around his shoulders despite the cold rain soaking her own clothes. Within minutes, the storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. No one had been injured. The festival committee thanked Ethan repeatedly for his quick thinking. He simply shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. Claire quietly looked away. She knew better. Not everyone would have run toward danger. Some people calculated risks. Ethan simply acted. Later that evening, the festival resumed beneath a sky glowing orange with sunset. A local bluegrass band filled the square with music while families danced beneath strings of warm lights. Claire and Ethan sat together on a wooden bench overlooking the celebration. Neither of them seemed interested in joining the crowd. They really love you here, Claire said. Ethan watched Lily laughing with friends near the carousel. I've lived here my whole life. No. She shook her head gently. I mean, they trust you. He remained silent for a moment. I've learned something over the years. What? Trust isn't earned by saying the right words. He looked toward the families gathered beneath the lights. It's earned by showing up, again and again, especially when life gets hard. Claire lowered her eyes. No shareholder meeting. No awards ceremony. No business triumph had ever taught her something so valuable. Across the street, hidden behind the tinted window of a black SUV, Richard Hale quietly watched them sitting together. He had expected to find the CEO of Kensington Holdings. Instead, he found a woman smiling at a small-town mechanic as though she had finally discovered the one success money had never been able to buy. And in that quiet moment, Richard realized the greatest threat to Claire's carefully built empire was not a competitor. It was the peaceful little town that was slowly teaching her she no longer needed it to feel complete. The truth has a strange way of arriving without knocking. And when it finally does, silence often speaks louder than any explanation. Saturday morning dawned bright over Cedar Creek. The storm from earlier in the week had washed the sky clean, leaving behind an endless stretch of blue above the town square. Strings of lights still hung between the old brick buildings, and the Harvest Festival welcomed visitors from neighboring counties. Music floated through the air, children chased one another between market stalls, and laughter echoed across Main Street. For Ethan, it was another day helping wherever he was needed. For Claire, it was supposed to be one last peaceful afternoon before returning to Chicago. She stood beside Lily at the pie-baking contest, laughing as the little girl proudly displayed a blueberry pie that leaned slightly to one side. I think it looks perfect, Claire said. Lily giggled. It tastes better than it looks. I'm willing to be the judge of that. Nearby, Ethan watched them from across the square. There was something beautiful about seeing Lily smile so freely again. Since losing her mother years earlier, joy had come in small moments. Somehow, Claire had quietly become one of them. He walked over carrying 3 cups of fresh apple cider. I thought you two might be thirsty. Claire accepted hers with a grateful smile. You always seem to know exactly what people need. I usually guess. No, she replied softly. I think you pay attention. Before Ethan could answer, an unfamiliar sound rolled through the valley. The deep rhythm of helicopter blades. Heads turned upward. Children pointed toward the sky. Within seconds, a sleek black helicopter descended toward an open field beyond Town Hall, while 3 black SUVs entered Main Street one after another. The music stopped. Conversations faded. The peaceful festival fell into uneasy silence. What is going on? Someone whispered. The SUV doors opened almost simultaneously. Men in dark suits stepped out wearing discreet earpieces. They scanned the crowd with practiced precision before moving toward Claire. Richard Hale emerged from the last vehicle, his tailored suit untouched by the dust swirling around him. He stopped a few feet away. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Creek, his professional expression softened. "Miss Kensington." Claire closed her eyes. She had known this moment would eventually come. "I asked for 1 week. You've been gone 12 days. I know." The board meeting begins in 4 hours. Around them, the townspeople exchanged confused glances. Mrs. Dalton frowned. Mayor Collins looked at Ethan. Lily squeezed Claire's hand a little tighter. Richard continued speaking, his voice calm, but impossible for those nearby to ignore. "The directors, investors, and international partners are waiting for the CEO of Kensington Holdings." The words seemed to hang in the air. CEO, Kensington Holdings. A billionaire. Every face slowly turned toward Claire. The woman who had borrowed books from the tiny bookstore. The woman who had painted festival signs beside volunteers. The woman who had shared homemade pie on a wooden picnic table. Ethan stared at her quietly. Not with anger. Not yet. Only disbelief. Claire finally looked at him. "I'm sorry." He searched her eyes, hoping to find an explanation before finding the truth. "You own Kensington Holdings?" She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes. The company that's on the news almost every week." Another quiet nod. "I wanted you to know me first." The sentence was barely above a whisper. No one spoke. Even the children seemed to sense something important had changed. Richard stepped closer. "The helicopter is ready whenever you are." Claire never looked away from Ethan. "I don't want the helicopter. The board cannot wait." "I know." Her voice trembled for the first time. "But neither can honesty." She turned back toward Ethan. "I never lied about who I was inside." He remained silent. The apple cider in his hand had grown cold. "I never cared how much money you had," he finally said. His words were gentle, almost painfully gentle. "I just wish you had believed I could handle the truth." Claire felt her heart sink. Of everything she had feared, this was the one wound she had never wanted to cause. Not because she had hidden her fortune, but because she had hidden her trust. As the helicopter blades thundered overhead and every eye in Cedar Creek remained fixed upon them, the quiet little town witnessed something far more powerful than the revelation of a billionaire's identity. They witnessed 2 honest hearts standing only a few feet apart, separated not by wealth, but by one secret that had arrived a little too late. Sometimes, the deepest loneliness is not caused by distance. It comes from realizing that the person you trust most no longer knows how to look at you the same way. The helicopter disappeared beyond the hills, leaving only a fading echo over Cedar Creek. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least, everyone pretended it had. The festival lights came down one string at a time. Vendors packed away their wooden stalls. Children returned to school. The familiar rhythm of the little town quietly resumed. Only Ethan noticed how much quieter everything had become. Every morning he unlocked Walker Auto Repair before sunrise, just as he always had. The scent of fresh coffee still filled the garage. Country music still drifted from the old radio. Customers still stopped by to wave before work. Nothing had changed. Except every time a dark blue sedan appeared at the end of Main Street in his memory, it never actually arrived. Lily noticed it too. "Dad." He looked up from replacing a brake pad. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Claire is okay?" He tightened one last bolt before answering. "I hope so." "You miss her?" He smiled faintly. "I miss my friend." Lily lowered her eyes. "I miss her too." Neither of them said another word. Some feelings were too honest to explain. Hundreds of miles away, the skyline of Chicago stretched endlessly beneath gray autumn clouds. Claire stood alone inside the top-floor office of Kensington Holdings, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Board meetings resumed. Investors applauded another record quarter. Business magazines praised her latest acquisition. Television hosts called her one of the most influential women in America. Every success sounded strangely empty. Excellent presentation, Claire. Outstanding negotiation. The shareholders are thrilled. She smiled politely. She thanked everyone. Then she returned to an office that had never felt so enormous. Late that evening, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside rested a small paper bag. Mrs. Dalton's bakery. The blueberry muffin Ethan had saved for her weeks earlier had long since disappeared, but she had quietly kept the folded paper. It still carried the faint scent of cinnamon. She gently traced the bakery's faded logo with her fingertips. Her assistant knocked softly. "Miss Kensington, come in." Richard Hale stepped inside, carrying several folders. The Zurich merger requires your signature. She nodded. He placed the documents on her desk, but didn't leave. You haven't been sleeping. I'm fine. You've skipped 6 dinners this week. I'm busy. Richard studied her for a long moment. No. His voice softened. You're homesick. Claire almost laughed. Cedar Creek isn't my home. Then why do you keep looking at photographs of it? She looked toward the computer monitor. Without realizing it, she had left open a simple picture taken during the Harvest Festival. Lily holding a blueberry pie. Ethan laughing beside her. Nothing expensive. Nothing extraordinary. Everything she missed. Back in Cedar Creek, another quiet evening settled over Miller Lake. Ethan and Lily sat together at their favorite fishing dock as the sun melted into shades of orange across the water. Neither of them had caught a single fish. Neither of them seemed to care. Lily broke the silence first. Mom used to say that people leave for different reasons. Ethan looked toward the horizon. She did. But she also said. The little girl searched carefully for the exact words. If someone leaves because they're afraid, sometimes they're hoping someone will still be waiting when they find the courage to come back. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He stared across the still lake where the first stars slowly appeared. I don't know if Claire will ever come back. Lily slipped her small hand into his. I think she wants to. At that very moment, inside her office in Chicago, Claire stood before the same autumn sky, watching the evening star appear above the city skyline. Thousands of lights surrounded her. Yet all she could think about was one quiet garage, one little girl, and one man who had never loved her because she was extraordinary. He had loved her because, for a little while, she had simply been Claire. And for the first time in her remarkable life, she understood that losing the peace she had found in Cedar Creek hurt far more than losing every fortune she had ever built. There comes a moment when success asks one final question. What are you willing to give up for the life you truly want? The answer changes everything. Winter arrived quietly in Chicago. Snowflakes drifted past the towering glass windows of Kensington Holdings, softening the city's sharp edges beneath a blanket of white. Inside the executive boardroom, the year's final meeting was reaching its conclusion. Charts filled enormous screens. Profits had surpassed every projection. Applause echoed around the polished table. Ladies and gentlemen, one director announced proudly, this has been the most successful fiscal year in company history. Everyone turned toward Claire. She should have smiled. Instead, she looked out the window. She saw snow. But in her heart, she saw autumn leaves falling across Main Street in Cedar Creek. Miss Kensington, another director asked. We're waiting for your closing remarks. Claire slowly stood. She folded the prepared speech she had never intended to read. I've spent 15 years believing success meant building something bigger every single year. The room fell silent. I was wrong. Several directors exchanged uncertain glances. Richard Hale quietly lowered his pen. For the first time in my life, Claire continued, I've discovered that building a meaningful life is far more important than building a larger company. No one interrupted. I'll remain chairwoman. A murmur spread across the room. But beginning today, daily operations will be led by the executive committee. Someone spoke up immediately. You're stepping back? I'm choosing balance. The market won't understand. Claire smiled gently. Maybe not today. She gathered only one small leather notebook before walking toward the door. What about your security team? Richard asked. I won't need a convoy. The press. They'll find another headline. The helicopter? She paused. I think I'll drive. 3 days later, a silver station wagon, not a limousine, rolled quietly along the familiar country road leading into Cedar Creek. No flashing lights. No security vehicles. No photographers. Only Claire. Only one suitcase resting in the back seat. She slowed as the wooden sign welcomed visitors into town. Welcome to Cedar Creek. Population, 2,843. Home. She whispered the final word before realizing she believed it. Across town, Walker Auto Repair looked exactly the same. The old radio still played country music. The coffee pot still sat in the corner. Ethan was replacing the transmission on an old pickup when he heard tires crunch softly across the gravel outside. He glanced toward the open garage door. For a brief second, he thought he was imagining her. Claire stepped out of the car wearing blue jeans, brown boots, and the same cream-colored sweater she had worn the day she introduced herself as simply Claire. She looked nervous. Far more nervous than the billionaire who had once addressed thousands of shareholders without hesitation. Ethan slowly wiped his hands on an old shop towel. Neither of them moved. Finally, she spoke. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." He smiled faintly. "I've been here every day." She nodded. "I know." There was another long silence. Not uncomfortable, only honest. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." She took one slow step forward. "I was afraid." "Of what?" She looked down before answering. "If you knew who I was. I thought you'd only see the CEO." Ethan's expression softened. "And if you had trusted me." He took one step toward her. "I would have had the chance to see the woman." Tears gathered in Claire's eyes. "I resigned from running the company." His eyebrows lifted. "You gave all that up?" She gently shook her head. "No." She smiled through the tears. "I finally stopped letting it own me." At that very moment, the bell above the garage door jingled again. "Dad." Lily walked inside carrying a backpack almost as big as herself. She froze. For one heartbeat, no one spoke. Then her face lit up brighter than the winter sun. "Claire." She dropped her backpack onto the floor and ran straight into Claire's arms. Claire knelt instantly, holding the little girl as though she had been missing a piece of her own heart. Watching them together, Ethan realized something profound. Claire hadn't returned with wealth. She hadn't returned with power. She had returned with something infinitely more valuable. The courage to choose love over everything she had once believed she couldn't live without. The world often celebrates wealth, power, and success. But every now and then, it grows wonderfully quiet to honor something far greater, a heart that never stopped choosing kindness. Spring returned to Cedar Creek with gentle rains and fields blooming in every shade of green. Wildflowers lined the country roads. Children rode bicycles through the town square, and the old maple trees stretched fresh leaves toward the warming sun. Life had found its peaceful rhythm once again. Only this time, Claire Kensington was part of it. Most mornings began before sunrise. She brewed coffee in the small lakeside cabin she had decided not to leave. She walked to Walker Auto Repair carrying 2 paper cups, smiling each time Ethan pretended to be surprised. "You know," he teased one morning, "I'm starting to think you don't trust me to make my own coffee." She laughed. "I've tasted your coffee, and you need me." He placed a hand over his heart. That was unnecessarily honest. From inside the garage, Lily groaned dramatically. "Please don't flirt before breakfast." The three of them burst into laughter. It was the kind of laughter that couldn't be rehearsed. The kind that only grew where people felt completely safe. Weeks later, Cedar Creek gathered for its annual spring fair beside Miller Lake. Colorful banners fluttered above the walking paths, while local musicians filled the afternoon with soft country melodies. Families spread picnic blankets beneath the trees, and children chased one another across the open fields. No reporters came. No television cameras waited. No one cared that one of the guests happened to be one of America's wealthiest women. To the people of Cedar Creek, Claire was simply the woman who volunteered at the library every Wednesday, baked cookies with Mrs. Dalton on Fridays, and never missed Lily's school events. As the sun began to set, Mayor Collins stepped onto the small wooden stage. "I have one more announcement." The crowd gradually grew quiet. "This year, our Community Heart Award goes to someone who reminded us that greatness has nothing to do with titles." Claire looked around, assuming someone else would stand. Instead, the mayor smiled directly at her. "Claire." She froze. "No, I don't." The crowd applauded warmly. Mrs. Dalton wiped away a tear. The elderly veteran from the post office smiled proudly. Children cheered as though celebrating one of their own. Claire slowly walked onto the stage. "I don't deserve this," she whispered into the microphone. Mayor Collins smiled. "Exactly why you do." The applause grew even louder. Claire looked across the crowd until her eyes found Ethan and Lily standing together beneath the maple trees. Everything she had spent years searching for was right there. Not in skyscrapers. Not in headlines. Not in stock prices. In 2 smiling faces. Later that evening, after the fair had ended and the stars filled the sky above Miller Lake, Ethan and Claire walked along the old wooden dock where Lily skipped stones months earlier. The lake reflected the moon like polished glass. Neither of them hurried to speak. Ethan reached into the pocket of his jacket. "I've been carrying something around for a while." Claire looked at him curiously. He opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple silver ring. Beautiful not because it was expensive. Beautiful because it was chosen with love. "I can't promise private islands," Ethan said quietly. She laughed through gathering tears. "I don't want private islands. I can't promise a perfect life. I don't need one." He smiled. "But I can promise that every morning, I'll choose you." Claire's tears finally escaped. "And every morning," she whispered, "I'll choose this life." She nodded before he even finished asking. The answer had been living in her heart long before the question. Behind them, hidden at a respectful distance, Lily watched from the porch of the nearby boathouse. When Ethan slipped the ring onto Claire's finger, she clapped both hands over her mouth to keep from squealing. The little town remained wonderfully quiet. The wind drifted gently across the lake. The stars shimmered overhead. And in that sacred silence, Cedar Creek witnessed something no fortune could ever purchase. A struggling single father who never chased wealth. A billionaire who finally stopped chasing success. And two ordinary hearts that discovered the greatest miracle was never finding each other. It was becoming the home each had been searching for all along.